Welcome to the Psychology of Adolescence and Emerging Adulthood. My name's Dr. Stephanie Stern, and for those of you who have not had me in class before, I want to start off by briefly introducing myself. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and received my bachelor's in psychology from the University of Tennessee, as well as a master's in psychology from OU and a PhD in social psychology with a concentration in developmental psychology from OU as well. This is my second year and I think my fifth semester at Cameron. I love football. I like to play tennis. I love to cook. I also collect historic cookbooks, a weird, quirky fact about me. For example, my favorite one right now is Jubilee, which tells the history of African American cooking throughout the last 2 centuries. Cooking and cookbooks in general are a great way to learn about history and culture and what it was like during a certain time or in a certain area. So that's one of the ways that I think it's really fun to learn. And then added benefit of food as well, which I also love. As a psychologist, I actually research fiction. I research various aspects of fiction, like favorite characters, shipping, what we learn from fiction, things like, does watching a specific show about a specific psychological disorder teach me things about that disorder? Can watching a show about a type of person I've never met before change how I think and feel about that person? If you're interested in research, feel free to send me an email if that's something you'd like to get involved in. My lab's always taking research assistant applications, and we'd be happy to have you. So feel free to reach out if that's something you're interested in. I would also like you to introduce yourself. This week we have our first assignment due, Introduction Discussion Board, by the end of the day Friday. You need to introduce yourself and respond to at least 2 classmates' introductions. This is something we're going to be doing together every week, so this is a good chance to go ahead and get used to what the course format will be like. We will, of course, talk a little bit more about that in a minute. My office hours this semester are entirely through Zoom, email, or phone call. I will be in my office either at my house or on campus on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 to 3, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9:30 to 10:30 and 1 to 2. During that time, if you call me or send me an email, I will do my best to either respond right away, which often happens, or by the time that office hour period ends. I might, of course, have another student who I'm meeting with and be unable to, just like in normal office hours, but I will do my best to get back to you before office hours end that day. I'll also have an open Zoom meeting on Tuesdays from 9:30 to 10:30 and Thursdays from 1 to 2. I'll be making an announcement later this week about how to access that. If you need to meet with me, want to meet over Zoom, and didn't feel like scheduling an appointment ahead of time, you can pop into those Zoom meetings. It'll put you in a waiting room, and then I'll bring you in as soon as I'm ready. Now to move on to the slightly more fun topic, we want to look a little bit at what we're going to be learning this semester. You are in a developmental psychology class, which means we're going to focus on growth and change, specifically from a physical and cognitive, as well as a psychosocial perspective. For our class, that change and growth is going to be looking specifically at ages 10 to 25, or what we call adolescence and emerging adulthood. Some fun questions we're going to be answering this semester. How do our identities develop? How do we choose our careers? When are our brains done developing, and what's going on up there before that happens? What are our first romantic relationships like? How does the way we think change as we develop? What's the hardest part of being an adolescent? Are the first few years of life or of adulthood a unique developmental period? And where does that come from? How long have we considered that its own thing? Talking specifically about emerging adulthood there. And then why are friends so important to us during adolescence? And what happens when that importance is surpassed by romantic partners as we move into adulthood? To look a little bit more specifically at the unit breakdown, for Unit 1, we'll of course introduce our class. We'll look at biological and cognitive development. We'll talk about cultural beliefs when it comes to development during these periods. How do different cultures approach adolescence and emerging adulthood? We'll talk about gender and the self. Then in Unit 2, we'll talk about family and romantic and friendship relationships, as well as specifically love and sexuality. We'll talk about school and work as developmental contexts. Then we'll talk about the effect media has on today's adolescents and emerging to adults living in today's world. We'll then end the semester by looking at common problems people experience during this period of development and something called resilience. A few quick tips before we look at the assignment breakdown, ways that I think you will do as good as you would like to do in this class. The first one is to take notes while you're reading the textbook. You will, of course, be expected to read your textbook, but it's not enough to just sit there and look at the words. Take notes, write down important concepts, and then next to that, write an example, why that concept matters to you. Write your own definition of vocab terms. Pull out statistics you might think are important. Connect topics to each other, even across different chapters. Each week, you will have between 1 and 4 video lectures to watch as well. These lectures will cover the most important topics from the reading, although they might not cover everything. While you're watching those lectures, you should take notes as well. You'll have access to my PowerPoints if you would like to download them and use them to take notes, but don't copy down what's on the slides. You already have that. Write down examples I give, anything I say that isn't written on the slide. Write down again your own example, your own definition, what you think of when we're going over a specific context. That's the best way to take notes and will very much help you do well in this class. The third thing I want to remind everyone to do is to incorporate our course content into your discussion board posts. It's not enough to just be like, well, the question you asked in the post made me think of this. You actually need to tie it into the readings and lecture videos for that week. I do that because making connections between those personal experiences we often talk about in discussion boards and our course content is the best way to not only remember the content for the test, but make the content meaningful for you in your own life and remember it long term. And then, of course, my last tip is to study as we go. You're only going to have 2 exams in this class. We'll talk more about that in a minute. It's going to be a long time between chapters and exams, so I want you to make sure you're setting aside time each week to review that week's content. Now let's take a second to look at the different assignments we'll be completing this semester. You will have a chapter quiz to take each week, which will make up about 20% of your final grade. You need to complete 10 of these chapter quizzes for 20 points each. That's 1 a week, but I've given you 3 free passes. You have 13 chapter quizzes to choose from, and you need to complete 10 of them. I, of course, suggest saving your 3 free passes in case something comes up, but if you have a week you know you're going to be especially busy, you might want to plan on using one of those free passes then. These chapter quizzes will cover specifically the reading, meaning that there might be questions that I do not cover in my lecture videos. Because of that, you need to make sure you read the chapter before taking the quiz. You will, however, be allowed to use your textbook when you're taking the quiz, but you'll only have 20 minutes to complete it. So again, make sure you've read through it at least once before tackling that chapter quiz. These quizzes can be found in each week's corresponding folder under course content in Blackboard, and they're due each Wednesday. Okay, I'll remind you every Monday and Wednesday that your quiz is due, but make sure you know that chapter quizzes are due on Wednesdays. Next, of course, we have our discussion boards, which will make up about 15% of your grade. There's 15 discussion boards, 1 per week, and you need to make an original post and respond to at least 2 classmates every week. Each of your posts, your original post and your responses needs to be a minimum of 100 words and make a substantial contribution to the discussion, meaning that you need to say more than just, I agree, or hey, I also said that. If you're worried about whether or not something you want to say is a substantial contribution, feel free to email it to me before you post it, and I'll let you know if you need to add some stuff. These are due every Friday, so chapter quizzes due Wednesdays, discussion boards due by the end of the day every Friday. As I mentioned, you'll have 2 exams this semester, each exam covering only material from that specific unit. The final is not cumulative. Your exams are multiple choice, 50 questions, each worth 4 points. I want to go ahead and let everyone know that your second exam, which you'll be taking during finals week, has to be proctored. Make sure you take some time this week to complete your proctoring form for each of your online classes. And then once we start to approach finals week, go ahead and schedule your proctoring. I'll remind you a few times, probably about 15 times as we approach that due date. Both of your exams will be taken on Blackboard. Your first one you'll have between Monday and Friday of the assigned week to complete. And your second exam you'll have Tuesday through Friday at noon to complete. Again, that one's during finals week. The last assignment we have this semester is something we're calling the movie assignment. Part of our class is going to involve you watching one of these movies or a few episodes of a TV show on this list and telling me about the developmental experience of the main character. In this paper, you will apply biological, social, and psychological concepts and something called ecological theory, which we'll learn about soon. You'll write a one-page plot summary of the movie, 2 to 3 pages describing the biopsychosocial development of that main character, and then another page outlining the ecological system of that main character, using 5 specific examples. This will make more sense as we begin to learn about ecological systems theory later on in this semester. This paper does need to be in APA format, and you need at least 6 sources. We'll talk more later on about how to find academic sources and how to cite them internally and in a works cited page. I know many of you have done this before. This is going to provide another opportunity to practice. We'll talk more about this assignment later on, but I want to go ahead and point out that during Unit 2, there's one specific week where all we're going to be working on is the movie assignment. You will not have an additional chapter to work on that week, just the movie assignment and a discussion for the week. This is your grade breakdown. You can find this information in the syllabus at any time. Notice that our course is points-based, which means to calculate your grade at any specific point in time, you want to take your current total points, divide that by the number of points we have had possible at that point, and multiply it by 100. If you need help with that at any point, feel free to email me. Before we end, I want to go over a few course policies with you. The first one is that you are not going to be allowed makeup exams without documentation in extreme circumstances, such as the death of a loved one or illness. If something happens, please reach out to me. As long as it's something we can document, I can allow you to make up that exam. So don't worry if it happens. I understand that. Even though this policy is pretty strict, I understand that things happen. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you do end up having a documentable excuse that I approve to make up an exam, you need to let me know within 24 hours, first of all, of the exam, and then you'll have a week to make up the exam from the exam date. That only applies to exam 1, however. Finals week works a little bit differently, so if you think you might have something come up that week, make sure we're planning ahead of time. Late essays, late discussion posts, and late chapter quizzes will not be accepted. The last thing I want to remind you is that a big chunk of our class, of course, is online discussions, and I'd like to remind everyone that when we talk about sensitive topics, please respect one another. I have always noticed that my discussion boards are places of great support for my students. You all always offer each other words of encouragement when discussing stressful times and experiences, and I always love to see that. And I know we'll have a similar atmosphere this semester as well, but if there is something you say that disrupts the learning environment, I may ask you to no longer participate in discussion boards anymore. So again, just make sure we're allowing everyone to feel accepted and safe to share and comfortable in our discussion board environment. That's all I have for you. If you have any questions at any point during the semester, you want to get a few more examples of a concept, ask me if you're understanding something correctly, you're struggling with a discussion post, you're not sure if you're studying correctly, please feel free to reach out via email, phone call, set up a Zoom appointment, or pop into my open Zoom hours at any point. I hope we all have a great semester.